to the second session of our sustainability conference. This afternoon, we're very fortunate to have with us Sarah Miller, who is a director of the Rediscovery Centre in Dublin. I'm just going to give you a little bit of background to the Rediscovery Centre, where it's coming from. Those of you who've lived in Dublin will be familiar with Ballymun. For those of you who don't know Dublin, Ballymun is a district on the north suburbs of Dublin. It's on the outer perimeter of Dublin. And back in the 1950s, Ballymun was hardly more than a couple of houses in the countryside. And at that time, Ireland and Dublin particularly was still suffering from a tremendous lack of housing. Ireland was a poor country at the time, and in the inner city of Dublin, many people were living in situations of extreme poverty with very poor quality of housing, lots of overcrowding, ancient buildings, many of them more than 100 years old, in an advanced state of dilapidation, very little by way of sanitation, and generally speaking, living conditions that you wouldn't really wish on anybody. Ireland has been trying to address this situation for many years. It continues to be a problem, but thankfully we're not in the same condition that we were in the 1960s. And at that time, the Dublin Corporation started a project which was revolutionary in Ireland at the time. And they decided to use the greenfield site at Ballymun to build what they regarded as a state-of-the-art housing project, accommodating families in high-rise towers, certainly high-rise by Dublin standards at the time. I think there were probably about 12 or 13 floors. And these were constructed to a high standard. They had communal heating, they had elevators, they had modern sanitation, and so on. And they effectively shipped the families from these tenement type accommodations in the centre of Dublin out to the new residential centre of Ballymun. With the best of intentions, but unfortunately, the project, for various reasons, was not a success, or maybe considered a success by some parameters. But what's not in any doubt is that over the years, Ballymun became associated with social problems of all different types. And a part, at least, of the responsibility for this was directed at the concept and design and execution of the Ballymun Towers themselves. And they have since been deactivated, if I can use that expression. New accommodation was constructed in the locality with a completely different approach to community living. And the last of the towers was destroyed in late 2015. Sarah is director of the Rediscovery Centre, which partly is also central to a redevelopment of the area, meeting the challenges of architecture, city design, and social aspects. I think at this stage I can pass over to Sarah, ask her to take up the story at this point. Sarah, you're still on mute.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you today. I was just mentioning earlier, I have very fond memories of Portugal because it's the last place that I went to visit before all the restrictions came in. So I managed to get a quick holiday in last February, so delighted to speak to you, not be there in person. It'd be much nicer to be there in person talking to you today. But in the absence of that opportunity, I'm delighted to talk to you today about the work that we have been doing in Ballymun, and in particular the work of the Rediscovery Centre, which is the organisation that I'm the chief executive of. I'm going to share just a few pictures just to help maybe bring the story to light. As you mentioned, John, I suppose Ballymun itself is an area north of the city in Dublin. It's very close to the airport. If you're flying into Dublin, you will often see the chimney of the old Ballymun boiler house, which is actually the building that we now occupy. It was developed in the 1960s. The entire area was developed to alleviate overcrowding in Dublin in the inner city tenements, and 3,000 apartments were constructed, primarily from precast concrete, and they were produced in kind of a factory based on site in Ballymun. The flats themselves, there were 7 15-story flats, 19 8 stories, and then there were 10 4 stories. So all very innovative, as you said, at the time. But very quickly, I suppose, it began to deteriorate. In the 1960s, it was obviously a really positive move for lots of people moving out of the inner city. There were very spacious apartments. They had, as you mentioned, central heating, district heating systems, lots of open space, and really comfortable. And that was all very sharp contrast to what was being provided in the inner city at that time. However, they weren't easy to service. Additional services such as, you know, any kind of economic development in relation to shops or, you know, healthcare or indeed any recreational services were very limited. This whole idea of the central spines within the Ballymun towers themselves were very difficult, because obviously if the lifts broke down, which they often did, then it was a difficult climb to, you know, the top of the flats or to the top of the towers with your groceries. As I say, there was a lot of open space, but not a lot of recreational space. So a few small parks scattered around. And ultimately, I suppose, as you know, in 1970s and as the kind of economic downturn happened, high unemployment raged in Ballymun area. About 40% of men aged 25 to 44 were unemployed, and there was very low levels of educational attainment. 70% of the tenants were dependent on social welfare, and lots of people were dropping out of school at an early age. And I suppose because of political and local campaigning, ultimately Ballymun Regeneration was set up in 1998 to address what was identified as a failed social housing project. And the entire project was aimed at not just improving the housing in the area, but also trying to improve the lives of all the people living in that area. At the time, there were about 19,000 people living in Ballymun in 1998. Like, obviously, the population began to decline. But with that, I suppose, there was a big focus on how the area could be developed as, you know, a really vibrant community where people would want to live, to do business, and to raise children. And so there was a huge focus on this sustainable development ambitions. So not just looking at the physical, but looking at the economic, the social, and the environmental objectives of a regeneration initiative. So the Ballymun Master Plan was designed in 1998, taking all of those ambitions on board. And some beautiful housing began to be developed as part of the regeneration project. Alongside that, there were lots of amenities and sports facilities, beautiful parks, which, you know, created a whole new town really, and a really vibrant place to live and to work in. Alongside all of that, there were some very ambitious arts projects and some really beautiful pieces of art actually all over Ballymun. Part of this was instigated by the Percent for Art project. So this was basically a government incentive whereby 1% of every government construction budget over a certain level was dedicated to the creation of original artwork, and that was to be exhibited in the built environment. So it brought about these beautiful pieces of art within the area, and lots of really innovative projects as well. What I suppose I joined in 2004, and at the time there were other environmental initiatives as well beginning to emerge as part of the Sustainable Development Project. We very much began to look at how we could engage with the community to promote best practice, how we could look at assisting local businesses to support the environment, how we could support educational development through environmental initiatives, and really looking at how we could cultivate a kind of a sense of pride and build a really integrated community spirit within the area. And I suppose we used environmental initiatives to address some of those ambitions. So I might just talk through some of those, John, if you want me to keep on going, or yeah.
Yes, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, please do. Please do. No, follow your guide there. I think it will take us where we need to be.
Okay. So yeah, we looked at things like waste management, for example. So if you can imagine, in the old Ballymun Towers, you had these, central waste chutes where everything, every piece of waste, be it recyclable, glass, cardboard, food waste, general household waste, it all went into one central chute. So there was no sense of, I suppose, environmental responsibility. The corpo at the time, Dublin City Council, would come and take that waste away. And I suppose the residents weren't really ever engaged in, providing solutions for any environment problems. There was no sense of kind of personal responsibility because of the way it had been set up. So one of the first strategies that we worked on was a waste management strategy, and actually looking to see how we could put in place recycling services, how we could put in place, better bin management, looking at composting within gardens. That was another very important element of the work in the early days of Ballymun Regeneration, was looking at that transition, people moving from, an apartment with literally no garden, maybe some, planting boxes on their balconies, but apart from that, not a lot of space to do any gardening, and therefore a lot of people wouldn't have had experience in having a garden or what to do with gardening. So we set about developing things like biodiversity action plans, looking at how we could encourage people to maintain their gardens, to use their gardens to attract biodiversity into the area. And we basically implemented a lot of environmental policies to support that transition from kind of an urban high-rise apartment into people moving into their own homes, where they had responsibility for managing all their own waste, for managing their energy efficiency, for managing gardens, for looking at, I suppose, their own transportation and parking and all of those things, I suppose, that weren't really a concern when they lived within the tower blocks. So a lot of the work was focused around, as I said, promoting best practice. So we really wanted Ballymun to be identified as an area of excellence. So, we were trying to look for opportunities for people to look at Ballymun in a new and a positive way, and to see, that there was a really strong sense of community in Ballymun, and always has been. But, people were coming together to showcase really innovative environmental solutions. And Ballymun, over that period of time, won about 40 national and international awards for their environmental innovation. A lot of the work was around getting communities working together. So we were involved in, developing things like Tidy Times committees, working on competitions for the best garden in the area, getting neighbours to work together to run competitions and to apply to compete in the best area, and people were out planting within their communities, going into kind of public spaces and creating lovely wild gardens, and even growing vegetables, and looking at how they could compost in their own gardens. So lots of really kind of innovative environmental solutions at the time. Now, obviously, things have moved on, and a lot of what was considered to be very innovative in 2004 is not necessarily seen. So today, everyone is, generally recycling properly. Most people are looking at managing their food waste in an appropriate way. Lots of people are growing their own food. Lots of people have brought in biodiversity actions within their own gardens. Another element of the work was trying to engage young people in science, and particularly women, to get women interested in science at a young age, to get kids interested in, realizing that there could be opportunities for them within science, technology, engineering, and maths to, form careers, to try and break intergenerational unemployment as well, was another objective that we really tried to focus on. And through that, we began to build some social economy innovation projects. So we were looking for projects that could simultaneously address waste problems, could potentially create jobs, and could highlight Ballymun as an area of environmental innovation. And that's where the idea for the Rediscovery Centre came about. We started working in 2006 with Rediscover Furniture, which is basically a social enterprise where people donate furniture to the project, and through a training and employment program, we upcycle, reuse, restore the furniture, and then we sell it on through our eco store, or at the time we used to sell it through markets and through third-party retail. And the money that we generate from that process is then reinvested into the program to provide additional training for people so that they can go on to get work. And over 90% of the people that we work with and have been working with since 2006 go on to full-time education or straight into work. So it's very successful in terms of labour activation. Building on the success of Rediscover Furniture, we set up then Rediscover Fashion, which again is a very similar initiative. We work with donated textiles, and from those donations, we make a beautiful clothing range. We make homeware products. We sell those, and the money that we generate is invested back into the program. And we work with people who are long-term unemployed or have been socially excluded from the workplace for one reason and another, and we give them skills then to get back to work. Likewise, Rediscover Paint is a fairly clever environmental initiative where we save waste paint from being generated. We work with local recycling centres. We take all the water-based emulsion paint, and through our community employment program, we recycle that, we repot it, and we sell it. And then the money that we generate from that, again, is reinvested into the initiative and provides training for people, either within a technical skill in furniture or fashion or paint or cycling mechanics, or potentially in a completely different discipline altogether. It really depends on the person's interests. And Rediscover Cycling then, again, another great initiative. It's very, very popular at the moment, obviously. There's a big cycling boom in Ireland at the moment. So it's a great one for getting young people who have dropped out of school early engaged in a program where they can learn new skills, potentially go straight into a job. A lot of the people that we work with in Rediscover Cycling would have a job within 9 months because there's such a need at the moment for qualified bike mechanics. So again, very successful program for taking people from long-term unemployment and getting them into work. Rediscover Furniture, people tend to stay a little bit longer. There's a lot of skills to be gained within the furniture sector, and that's everything from reupholstery, French polishing, right through to kind of more modern techniques of decoupage and upcycling. So that's where the whole social innovation for the Rediscovery Centre began. As the regeneration programme was beginning to transition and the responsibility was taken back by Dublin City Council, the old Ballymun boiler house, which provided all the heat and hot water for the tower blocks, was due to be demolished. So we had an idea to reimagine that space. This was it when we were looking at it initially, to reimagine it as our new home. So we were operating in numerous locations all over Ballymun, retail units. We were in the flats ourselves, and some of our studios were initially in the tower blocks before they were demolished. And we created all of these, very successful social enterprises, and we were trying to find a home where we could bring everything together and really create a centre of excellence for social enterprise in reuse, and also to deliver a lot of our education programs. Big piece of our work is delivering environmental education, and we wanted to be able to do that in a building that reflected the ethos of the organisation itself. So we spoke to Dublin City Council and we spoke to the government, who were due to spend 700 or 800,000 knocking down this old building. And we expressed an interest to try and see if we could reimagine it as our new home. And I suppose that's essentially what we did. In 2012, we submitted a funding application to the European Life Programme, and we started to redesign and redevelop the Ballymun Boiler House as our new home and as a centre of excellence for the circular economy. So these are just a few pictures of what it looked like. As I mentioned, this was the district heating system for the area. So what you're seeing here at the moment is one of the old boilers. So these were 25-ton diesel generators that produced all the hot water for the district heating system. Some other pictures. So what we wanted to do was obviously keep whatever materials we could within the building, and through a process of deconstruction rather than demolition, was to save as much as we possibly could and reuse as much as we could, and then supplement that with renewable, sustainable materials, employing sustainable building practices, and then applying, renewable and sustainable systems in which the centre itself would operate. So it incorporates a number of educational exhibits. There's renewable and energy efficient systems within the building. We have closed loop wastewater treatment systems, rainwater harvesting, grey water recycling. The building itself has been made with sustainable building materials. So we've used hemp for a lot of the walls themselves. So the walls are created using hempcrete. We kept all the original concrete and steel, as you can see in this frame here. And we designed, the gardens were designed for biodiversity enhancement and for environmental education. And all of the systems really were designed in such a way that we could show how we can live more sustainably through employing natural systems, energy efficient systems, and sustainable systems. This gives you some of the some pictures of some of the features of the building. So, we employ things like living walls to attract biodiversity, and for water attenuation, we have solar PV and solar thermal. We have an air to water heat pump. We reclaimed a lot of the brick within the building. We took a lot of the old cladding from the building and turned it into some tiling here, which we've used along the walls. And all of the other materials that weren't reused or recycled have all been chosen based on their criteria around sustainability, which was very important to us. It is now the National Centre for the Circular Economy in Ireland. It's an award-winning circular economy demonstration centre. And we see it as a kind of a 3D textbook, which uses the built and the natural and the cultural environment that we work within to teach about sustainability. And then I suppose, just to summarize what we do, our work focuses in around three main themes. So education, demonstration, and advocacy. I mentioned the social enterprise activity that we've been, developing social enterprises since 2004. We have created this built space, which is a visitor centre. We run numerous kind of workshops. We teach, the general public as well, how to use sewing machines, how to upcycle furniture, how to make their own cosmetics, how to make cleaning products. We have all kinds of public engagement workshops to get people interested in more sustainable living. We run events, we run a conversation series to get people talking about the circular economy, which is all about trying to prolong the life of materials to make the most of the resources that we currently have in circulation, rather than living through this linear economy where we are continually extracting materials from the earth, using them for very short periods of time, and then disposing of them, which we all know is just unsustainable and causing climate breakdown. So we're really about trying to give people the tools to get them to live more sustainable lifestyles, and also to, I suppose, demonstrate different ways that people can live in a low carbon society. That's all the photos I have for you. So maybe you have some questions, John, for me.
Yes, we've got a couple of questions. I'd just like to put a question to you, which I know you and I have discussed before, relating specifically to these recycling initiatives. and the question of how financially sustainable this is, and related to that, to what extent is it capable of being scaled up and expanded? Obviously, the concept can be used anywhere, but if it's reliant on constant inflow of public money or subsidy or whatever, there's a question about how financially sustainable it is in the longer term.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and something that we've been, I suppose, reviewing and assessing and looking at over the years. Like our first social enterprise, we set it up in 2006. And at that time, we were very much focused on these kind of dual goals of creating jobs and employment for people, but also reducing waste. And obviously, we have to pay bills, so we had to make sure that we generated income as well. We initially tried to get to a point where all of the social enterprises were fully self-sustaining in terms of a financial model. And what we began to realize as we started to get to that point, as we started to get to the point where we were breaking even on all of the social enterprises, the social impact began to suffer. So I guess it depends on the reason for you being in business. We're not necessarily in business to make money. We have these dual objectives. So as we began to push for, more financial stability, we recognized that less people were going into full-time work because we weren't able to provide them with the support and the training that they needed because we were too busy focusing on generating income. So around 2014, we decided upon a model whereby 50% of our operating costs would be covered through the sales of products and services, and 50% we would generate from developing strategic partnerships, either with local government agencies or with corporate clients, or through providing, research initiatives or doing talks, or, basically providing other services that weren't linked to the social enterprise activity. And that's been really successful. Since we decided upon that, we've always operated at around that 50-50 model. So 50% being generated through the sale of products and services, and 50% generated through strategic partnerships.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's actually a very important point, because with any initiative like this, it's obviously very important to identify what exactly are the objectives. What are you really all about? And there is very often a tendency to push a project like this towards being financially viable or even profitable. And it may well be that at a certain stage you're actually missing the point of the entire exercise. So I had a couple of other questions which I think we can also address. So Ivo is asking, what is the biggest difficulty in implementing the project? What were your biggest hurdles in making it happen?
I think initially it was probably getting people on board, with the whole concept of social enterprise as a solution, and it was quite new. Environmentally focused projects and social enterprises were also quite new. We've seen huge changes at the moment over the past decade, but essentially in the last 5 years in relation to climate action, the circular economy, sustainability. It has become, very much supported and recognized by government, by business, through the education system. So we spent a lot of time initially trying to convince people that this was a good idea, and we don't have to do that anymore. So that was the hardest piece, was to try and get support for some of the initiatives that we're trying to set up, and trying to prove that there would be such successful social, economic and environmental impacts if people would back us in the early stage. And we were really lucky, Dublin City Council and Ballymun Regeneration had some very strong advocates for sustainable development working at the time. And so, we had a lot of people on our side talking and supporting the work that we were doing. So initially that was the struggle. It was really getting it off the ground, but we decided to just start small, let it grow organically. We weren't too ambitious initially, so we started off with that very small project. I think the initial backing for that was around 8,000, and that was a presentation that was made to Ballymun Regeneration and accepted. And from that, we just grew. And as we grew and our impact became recognised, then it was easier for us to apply for national awards or for European grants, because we had a evidence-based solution, and people were more likely to back us then.
Yeah, well, that's obviously very, very important. Paul's got a related question here regarding the possible plans to roll it out to other disadvantaged areas. And my question for you would be, do you have at this stage a kind of a template or a model which could be used to assist people in taking that initiative themselves? Obviously, every area is going to have its own specific circumstances and history and so on. But you, I guess, must have an outline at least of how one would approach a project like this.
Yeah, well, that's, I suppose, one of the strengths at the Rediscovery Centre is you have the social enterprises sitting alongside the research and policy and education units, and then you have the visitor centre. So a lot of the time when we're rolling out a project, we're also assessing it, we're watching it very closely, and we're creating templates, producing I suppose business models that people can replicate. And we spent a good bit of time a few years ago deciding how we could scale and what was the best opportunity for scale at a national level. And rather than going into communities and developing rediscovery centres all over the country, our solution to that was to create the Circular Economy Academy. And that's a service whereby we work with other social enterprises throughout the country so that they can work in their own communities to develop initiatives like what we're doing, but with local people and local social enterprises. So we don't helicopter into an area and start working there. We work with the people that are already working, and we share with them our experience of setting up the projects that we've set up here, and I suppose they get the benefit of our mistakes in the past, and that seems to be working very well for us. We have also just started rolling out our education program, and that again is a national program, but being delivered locally and regionally through facilitators in those areas. That's the way we feel that it's most successful, and it's kind of from the bottom up. Then it's the communities are actually developing the solutions themselves rather than us kind of jumping into someone else's area. But we do support. We have all the business templates, and Rediscover Paint has just gone national, and that's actually being supported with a corporate client and also with regional waste, the regional waste offices. So that's a really good solution. So we've designed the template here. We've proven that it works. We've come up with a replication model, and then we've been able to attract funding so that we can actually invest in the other social enterprises that want to do it.
Yeah. As you're speaking, I can't help but reflect on the variety of circumstances and challenges here in Portugal, because our history is somewhat different here from Ireland in some respects. If you drive around many districts outside Lisbon, or even in Lisbon itself, you'll see the remnants of what had obviously been quite thriving local commercial activities, brickwork factories, marble factories, former manufacturers of machinery or lots of different stuff. And one of the disadvantages of the let's say the modernization of the country came with the expansion and improvement of the communications network. We've got fantastic roads going all over the country, but at the same time, a lot of this local industry was totally destroyed, and there has been very little put in its place. And accompanying that, we've got problems of aging populations in many of these rural districts, and it's a tremendous problem to try to substitute for what was there before. I don't know whether you have any thoughts about the extent to which your kind of initiative it would be applicable to something like that.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about aging populations. Like a lot of the organizations that we would work with on a national basis would be people who are maybe retired. Could be, we work with men's sheds, for example. We work with the Tidy Times organizations. So a lot of these social enterprises or, community organizations are really in it for the social impact. It's not that, people are trying to generate big money businesses, but they are trying to regenerate their communities. And I think what you see there is a lot of really, a lot of great talent and a lot of strong minds, pulling together to come up with solutions for areas that have, hit upon hard times, I suppose. And I think the circular economy and any climate action work, there's a lot of volunteerism in that, which is great as well.
Yeah, would you like to just say a word about the Tidy Towns competition? I don't know if you're familiar with the background of it, the history and so on. I don't think we've got a similar concept to that here in Portugal, but it's something. I grew up in a town which was a regular winner of the Tidy Towns competition, at least back in the 60s and 70s. Yeah. And I think it's quite an interesting initiative for promoting local pride and so on.
It's excellent. And it's basically a national competition. It's funded by the government of Ireland. It's been going, as you say, for a very long time. And, communities, towns, villages, large urban areas all compete with each other to showcase their area as, the nicest place to be. So you have, awards for the most, the cleanest area, the litter-free areas. You have awards for, the most picturesque village, or there's all these kind of different categories. And initially when we decided in Ballymun that we were going to apply to the Tidy Towns Awards, a lot of people laughed at that idea, and they scoffed at the idea that Ballymun would even consider to enter the Tidy Towns competitions, because it can go to very beautiful villages and lovely seaside towns. And I suppose Ballymun, at the beginning of the regeneration program, certainly wasn't your typical candidate to win a prize. But it was really useful in mobilizing people, getting communities to work together, and just building that whole civic pride. We had there's 5 different neighborhoods in Ballymun. So we had them all competing against each other. One neighborhood wanted to outdo the other on their hanging baskets or how their green spaces were maintained. It really is a lovely competition. And we had local competitions as well for the best garden in Ballymun. So we would spend time going and looking at all these amazing gardens that you would never even know existed within such a high urban environment, but that's what it did. And it really got people thinking about the fact that they could have the best garden in Ireland if they wanted to. And people really put a bit of effort in, and it was great results.
Yeah,
I recommend it.
I would agree, absolutely. I don't think there's anything equivalent in Portugal, but I think it's an idea worth looking at. It actually ties into Sharon's question about what has been the impact socially on the local people. Has it changed from being a no-go area to being a best practice area?
Yeah, it has, for sure. It was definitely an ambition. We've always set out to create an eco destination to showcase, best practice in the circular economy. We're the only national centre for the circular economy that has such a demonstration centre throughout Europe, and that's why we were funded to rebuild the Ballymun boiler house. We had even last year with the troubles that we all faced in relation to restrictions and travel restrictions, we had about 10,000 people visit here. We've had way more online people engaging with the centre and really seeing Ballymun as an exemplar in the work that we do. And that's really positive. And, the schools, all the local schools talk about what we do here in the Rediscovery Centre, and they engage with the centre. And it's not just, the work that we do. There's an amazing art centre. The Access Art Centre is here. There are some fantastic music programs. The regeneration program really did commit to supporting that sustainable development element. So it wasn't just about the homes, it was, you know, about all the other supports that had to go there. Like we're on TripAdvisor now, and I think, you know, that wouldn't have been something that would have been thought of, you know, maybe at the beginning of the regeneration initiative, that we would be creating these destinations where people from all over the world would visit. And we have had people from all over the world. You know, if you're interested in the circular economy, the sustainable development goals, environmental education for sustainability, and you're coming to Dublin, you will come to the Rediscovery Centre if you feel that way, because it is different, it's unique, and, you know, people like to engage with something that's so innovative. And so, yeah, it has changed. It's, you know, it is an area to go to rather than not go to. And it's nice that the reason people are coming to us is because it's an environmental exemplar and people want to do what we are doing and they want to learn from the Rediscovery Centre, which is great.
Well, that's certainly a big change from the image that Ballymun would have had 20 years ago. And obviously to be congratulated on. Could I just ask the nature and character of your relationship with the local authorities? Are you at this stage something that they regard as something that's just mature and that they can tick the box and let you get on with life, or are they actively engaged with supporting and developing the project?
Very actively engaged, yeah. So we have a service level agreement with Dublin City Council, and most of the objectives around that are socially linked. So they would, you know, we have to report to them on how many people we work with from the local community, how many people are going into jobs, how many training courses we provide, you know, what schools programs we're running in the area. They would, you know, we have a really positive relationship with them, so they will come to us if there's a particular problem. Like at the moment, for example, there's a concern that some kids may not go back to school because everyone's been out of school for so long. So how can we encourage people, if they don't go back to school, to at least get involved in some informal education and training programs? So we're looking at that at the moment with them. You know, what can we provide maybe in terms of bike mechanic courses or furniture restoration courses or other landscaping or greening projects. So no, we've a very close relationship with the local community and also with the local authority in designing projects and solutions. And I don't know that ever changes, because, you know, the environment changes all the time. Now we're having to deal with COVID, and prior to that, you know, we were looking at the regeneration of some of the old shopping centre, and, you know, and trying to get people to come to the centre as well, you know, local people to come in and engage in our activities. So there's always a new relationship, it's always evolving.
Yeah, John Donnelly's asking here, he makes reference to a government regeneration programme worth 430 million euros, which sounds very nice. Are you participating in that, or do you have access to it, or are you aware of what
I don't have access to it, but I'll certainly be doing some Googling when we go off this call just to see why we're not part of it. We obviously were very well supported in the initial stages of the regeneration programme. So Ballymun Regeneration had a social regeneration fund, and there are still elements of that fund that have been transferred over to Dublin City Council. Dublin City Council now pay for kind of local services in the area, but I'm not sure of that specific programme that John's talking about.
Well, you can chase him down after the meeting.
I will.
Pedro here has a question also, which is quite interesting. He's asking about the demographic changes since 1997, and have you been able to attract new residents to the area, or is it a continuation of the existing community there? How has the place evolved since you've started?
Well, it was an interesting model, because with a lot of regeneration programs, what tends to happen is that the original inhabitants of the area are moved out, and then the area becomes gentrified and a whole other community moved back in. But that's not what happened in Ballymun. So what happened was people moved directly from the tower blocks into their new homes in Ballymun. So nobody got moved out. So it was like, in terms of logistics, it was a very complicated program because people were actually moving from the apartment block into their new home, and they weren't moving beside each other. They weren't all moving en masse. So all of that had to be managed. One thing that was, you know, really supported was trying to get local people to buy into their own homes as well. So they were trying to change the ownership model. So as I mentioned before, there's a very high level of social tenants in the flats, and there were a lot of incentives brought as part of the regeneration program to encourage people to buy into their own homes in the area. So a lot of people did take that opportunity and they bought their homes. So in terms of ownership, that changed, and the tenure diversity changed in general because there were new apartment blocks built in addition to that, and private investment came in. We've a lot of new student accommodation, so that's changed the kind of tenure diversity as well within the area. And yeah, there's I think that kind of the private investment, you know, was impacted upon by the big bust. You know, there was supposed to be more of a private investment in Ballymun, and we were just beginning to see that coming into play again, you know, with new shopping centre being developed, with new apartment blocks going up. And it is very different today, even in comparison to what it was maybe 2 years ago. So that's slowly beginning to come back into play, where apartment blocks are being developed and they're private apartment blocks, so that you're getting that mix in terms of kind of demographics as well in the area.
That's something that probably would have been unthinkable, let's say 15 years ago, the idea that there was going to be private investment in Ballymun. I mean, it really had not a good reputation at all.
No. And I think the regeneration program really had ambitions for that, but I think the timing, you know, I think a lot of the initial physical redevelopment was done by the local authority and by the government, and then the next phase was due to be that private investment, and then unfortunately, you know, we suffered financially just, and that didn't happen just as well as it could have. I think if it had been maybe another 5-10 years on, we would have seen a lot more development in Ballymun, but hopefully that will still continue.
Well, I have here what I think may be a final question. I don't know who sent it, but she is asking, what extra scope of development do you see at the centre in terms of green development and sustainability? Scope for more development?
We're never short on ideas. There's always lots and lots of opportunity. We have a vacant site in front of our building, actually, which we have been coming up with ideas as to how that could be developed and redeveloped as a kind of an interactive play area to promote the objectives of the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's one thing that we're working on. We're always, you know, trying to figure out how we can engage with, you know, a wider audience and more people at the centre. We have looked at, I suppose, demonstrating other material reuse streams. So one of the things we're really looking towards now at the moment is kind of eco-design and trying to encourage the design of new products so that they can be reused and recycled, and, you know, working to kind of build out obsolescence as well. We teach a lot in the universities, which is, you know, has been relatively new. We've been doing that over the last 4 or 5 years, where we've been going in and working with designers and trying to get them to think about the circular economy at that early stage, so that as they become, you know, the designers of the future, that we're going to see more sustainable products on the market. And yeah, there's endless opportunities, I think, within green development. Food and food waste is a big concern. At the moment, there's over 1 million tons of food waste wasted in Ireland every year. That's enough to feed 1 million people. So that's obviously not sustainable if you think about all of the resources that go into growing that food and, you know, transporting it around the country and selling it. So we have to get better in terms of our efficiency with food. So that's something we're working on. We have a little cafe here, and we want to demonstrate that as a circular economy cafe. So we're working with some local businesses to take their surplus foods as well and reuse those and do preserving and making, you know, juices, and showing people how we can make maybe those food that could have the potential go off, how we can keep them longer, how we can preserve them and freeze them and make edible products from them as well. And then obviously how to compost at the end of the day as well, so that at least if we're not able to consume that food, that we're able to get all the wonderful nutrients and put them back into the soil so that we can grow more food.
Very good. Well, I don't seem to have any more questions, but you've covered a fantastic amount of ground here over the last hour or so. It's been a most interesting and indeed entertaining presentation about a very fascinating project, which I think has probably given some food for thought to our participants here at the conference. I'd like to congratulate you on the initiative, and I'd like to thank you for your time here this afternoon. I'm sure there will be some people making contact directly with you and bothering you for information and possibly even assistance.
Yeah.
And I take the liberty of encouraging them to do so. Once again, Sarah, thank you so much, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much, John.